Welcome back to another episode of What Works Wednesday. I actually shockingly got a lot of comments on the last episode the last episode of What Works Wednesday, where we talked about things you can do now to still impact 2023's taxes. But most of the comments were around a small idea that was actually baked into the episode. It wasn't one of the core thoughts, which was this idea of hiring a tax planner or tax advisor versus a tax preparer, and what the difference is and how to know what you do. And you may be wondering, hey, we're past tax season. I finally got my taxes done. Why are we still talking about it? And the reason being that even though tax season is done, tax planning is a year round sport. It is a marathon. And in order to have your taxes as efficient as possible, especially as a self employed professional, you need to be thinking about it now, almost more than next January, February, March, because it's what we're going to plan and look at and do now that's really going to move the needle for you. So, in that episode, I basically talked about how oftentimes we look at our tax preparer and expect them to kind of know everything about taxes for us. And really, what they're doing is acting as a historian. They're looking out your rearview mirror saying, where have we gone on this journey over the last year? And how do we put that into paper? How do we catalog that for the IRS to make sure that you pay the right amount of taxes? Rarely are they actually looking forward and saying, all right, let's look through the front windshield at where you want to go, kind of the path we're on, and determine what the best moves would be for you from a tax perspective. And oftentimes they don't have all the pieces of the pie either. They're just looking at your taxes and your income. They're not looking at your business and your parents' gift that's coming and all these things. You kind of have to give them those tools in order to be able to do that well. So I constantly hear people, clients of mine or prospects or just people in the community complaining like, I pay this tax person and I don't feel like they're giving me any advice. And my response is, do you pay them for advice? I'm like, well, I pay them to do my taxes. I'm like, okay, so you're paying for tax preparation, not tax planning. That's a very different offering. That's a totally different business model, service model. Oftentimes people will say that about their financial advisor, but some financial advisors don't give tax advice based on their compliance and regulations or their certifications. You have to be a CPA, an enrolled agent, or an enrolled actuary in order to actually give formal tax advice. So it gets confusing for the everyday person. And when you're self-employed and you're running a million miles a minute with 1,000 plates spinning, trying to balance your business, working on your business, working in your business, your family and personal life, you don't have time to hunt down professionals and figure out what to do. But it's important because you also don't have time to do your tax planning. So what is tax planning? Why is it different? Well, it's that backward forward. Tax planning is saying, hey, I'm going to hire this person. They're going to come in. They're going to get to know every area of my financial life, my goals, my desires. They're going to look at my taxes from last year and maybe the last few years to figure out, okay, what have we been doing? What have we been depreciating? What accounts are out there that we've been getting capital gains taxed on? Sifting through them to say, okay, are the investments in that account tax efficient? How are we doing on that depreciation schedule? Is that coming up to an end? Do we plan to sell that vehicle? Because if we do, we're going to have to recapture that depreciation and that's going to cost you taxes. So what's something else we can do to create a loss to offset that? It's a big puzzle piece, but it's really important this time of year to do that. A couple key things, if you're listening to this in April, May, June 2024, and you're like, I need to do some tax planning, but I don't have a professional yet, reach out. We do tax planning. I'm also happy to connect you to another person who might be more specialized to your situation. We get inquiries all the time about that kind of stuff, and we are happy to give you a referral to someone. My goal is that people would have their team in place to help them optimize their finances and their business so that they can ultimately build the personal life they desire. So if you need help doing that, reach out. Alternatively, here are a couple things you can do right now looking at your tax return to try and do some adequate tax planning. Number one, establish your estimated payments. Now, your tax preparer may have given you some vouchers. That's most likely based off of last year's income. So as a business owner, you're supposed to pay taxes quarterly as you go through the year. If you're not doing that, that's a huge tax planning place where we can save you a lot of money because you're not going to get hit with penalties. So what you do is you can either estimate, like, this is what I think I'm going to make this year. I know I'm going to make more than last year, so this is what I think it's going to be. And then we can look at and say, all right, what was your tax bracket? Your not your tax bracket, your effective tax rate. What did you actually pay? And we can kind of figure out this is about what you're going to owe. And so now we're going to pay quarterly. And as long as we come within 90% of what you end up owing, you're going to be set. You're not going to get hit with a penalty. An alternative way that a lot of CPAs do, if you think you'll make a similar amount of money as last year, is you can take 100 or 110% of last year's taxes. So if you're like, okay, I ended up paying, I'm going to say 28 grand because it's easy when it's broken out. I paid 28 grand in taxes last year. Great. You can pay 7 grand each quarter, and that's going to suffice your what's called a safe harbor estimated payment. Now, those are the easy things. Those are low-hanging fruit. Establishing your estimated payments and paying them to your federal and state governments, if your state has income tax, are gonna save you in taxes. I know you're like, how is that saving me in taxes because I'm paying taxes? Well, that's by paying your quarterlies, you're not paying late, and so you avoid late penalties and interest. Secondly, an easy tax planning thing. Google if your state has a pass-through entity tax payment. And if you file your business as an S Corp, let your S Corp pay your personal state taxes. What that does is it makes it a business write-off. It takes your state tax that you have to pay personally, makes it a business deduction for next tax season. Easy, low-hanging fruit. Lastly, it's a little bit more complicated. This isn't low-hanging fruit. I would just look and say, all right, what activities are coming up this year? Do I need to buy a new car? Do I need to buy machinery for my business? And to make sure when you purchase that you utilize something called bonus depreciation. That's going to be a huge vehicle for you to lower your taxes this year and on ongoing years using what's called a depreciation schedule. So those are 3 quick things that tax planning can do to really benefit you. But I always recommend hiring a tax advisor. What you can do is just ask any professional, if it's your tax preparer, if it's your financial advisor, hey, do you do tax planning? Do you give tax advice? Let them tell you yes or no. And if they say yes, don't just accept that. Say, great, what does that look like? You want a professional who's going to be proactive, who, April, May, June, once your taxes are filed, are going to meet with you to review your tax return and project forward and create a tax plan for you. Oftentimes, professionals that give tax advice will just say, reach out if you have a question. That's not good enough. You want them to have been proactive and curate a plan of action for you looking forward. So remember, don't tip the IRS, tip your server instead. Make sure you're doing tax planning. It's going to be one of the biggest things that's going to save you. Paying taxes is going to be one of the biggest expenses in your life. So if we can lower that, we can save you generational amounts of wealth. So go forth, build the life you long for, do some tax planning to do it, and prosper.